So happy Sabbath, everybody, and thank you for coming to our study today, Sabbath School today. We're going to be starting off by a review of why Adventists will not see the Sunday law. This is a presentation that Elder Pimenda already has presented to us a while ago, and so we're just going to review it and obviously have some discussions about it. So can you go to the next slide, Emma, please? The two books that we're going to be addressing are First Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1, and Great Controversy. And if you can see all the chapters, I haven't got all the chapters there, but the chapters that I want to sort of bring to your attention are the ones that you see on the screen today. You'll see when you look at when these two books were written, they were written nearly sort of next to each other. So 1857 or 58, and the same with Great Controversy, which was 1858. So they were published sort of together. So we're going to go through that. So we're going to begin on the Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1. She begins with the fall of Satan. Then then the first advent of Christ. Then we go to the history of Christ down to the death of Stephen, and then conversion of Paul, the great apostasy, to the great mystery of iniquity, which is the 1260 period from 538 to 1798. And obviously we have the rise of the papacy. So she then talks about William Miller. We then have the sanctuary, spiritualism and covetousness, Waymark, and then we have the sins of Babylon. And we want to know, it says, and I'm asking, what were the sins of Babylon? And did Adventists understand what these were and where their information was gathered from? So that's a question to put to the brethren. So when we talk about the sins of Babylon and what did the Adventists understand what these were, and where did they gather their information from? And so could it have been from Revelation 17, Babylon the Great, or those type of things? So does anybody have any answers for that? What can they answer? That's to the group. So if we can, this is going to be interactive.
Sorry, Debbie, I don't understand your question.
I says, where it talks about the sins of Babylon, we know the sins of Babylon was to do with slavery. But I want to know, what do you think that the Adventists thought it was? Did they understand it was slavery? In a sense where it's slavery today, or? Is it, have I not asked the right question?
Do you mean the Advent movement, if they hadn't read what Ellen White said? If they hadn't read if they didn't read what she'd written, what did they think?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not too conversant with what we'll say the pioneers or the Millerites at the time thought of Revelation 17 and its relation to the sins of Babylon, etc. But I think, as Alpamenda iterated and as Natalie was pointing us to, Ellen White alludes to the sins of Babylon being slavery in specifically spiritual gifts, and they took a stance against slavery, but I'm not sure if they made that connection outside of Ellen White telling them that was the connection, slavery equals sins of Babylon. I don't know if they made that type of connection, but they recognized the ills of it. So without Ellen White explicitly saying so, I don't know if they would have I don't know if they did come to that conclusion.
No, okay then. All right, okay then. What I was trying to get at as well is it says I've written here. Right, okay. So basically what I was trying to get to was the fact that they were obviously we are using a different a type of method. They're using a different type of method. And I want to bring these methods so that we can understand what Adventists are using and what according to what we're using. So I don't know if you've ever spoken to or looked at a video with Ted Wilson on it, where he categorically says that the Adventist Church, they follow the historical grammatical method of interpretation with regards to proof text methods. So how does, when the Adventists look at these verses through the historical grammatical method, how are they interpreting it? So, you know, different from what we are. So we're going to look, first of all, to find that out, we're going to look at what the historical grammatical method is. And the historical grammatical it's a method of study that seeks to understand the biblical author's original intended meaning in the text through historical and grammatical study. So that process of determining means looking at the
Debbie, do you want us to forward the slide? Is that written on the next one?
No, I still want to stay on this one.
Okay, just say next when you want to change. Yeah.
Yes, I'll say next to, yeah, thank you. So basically this, the process for determining the original meaning is the text through examination of the grammar, of the historical background, the literary genre, which is style or category, the revealed presuppositions God has revealed through the Bible, so in other words, as assumed or beforehand. The historical grammatical method distinguishes between the one original meaning of the text and its significance. So the significance of the text is essentially the application or contextualization of the principles from text. These are allegories in the Bible. So what is an allegory? A created story to convey a spiritual truth and can be interpreted in a literal, physical way. Does everybody understand what the historical grammatical method is now? Or do they have an understanding of that?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long-winded thing, isn't it? So this method seeks to extract the plain meaning of any given passage. Hence, its goal is to understand what the author intended to communicate, which is discovered by using the normal principles of language and by being familiar with the historical setting. So what I found is this historical method. I found that when I looked deeper into it, that most Sunday churches, they use this particular method as well. So, and when you look through inspiration, nowhere does it say, well, I haven't found anything in inspiration where we have been told that we have to use this historical grammatical method. Does anybody else, have they found or understood where in inspiration that we're supposed to use this particular method?
Without knowing too much about the outcomes of the method or where it can be taken, but just hearing from your description of what it entails, I would assume that we use those tools and principles in our study when we seek to understand the context of an author, what their thinking at the time was, and why they wrote what they wrote. We take steps beyond that, but just from reading what you said, I would think that we employ some of those techniques now.
Yeah, well, not all of them. Elder Pavinder, what do you think about the historical grammatical method with regards to the proof text method?
What's your question? Because I don't know if you've asked a couple of questions. I don't know if they've all got answered.
Well, what I'm saying is that the church uses historical grammatical method.
Got that?
Yeah. With regards to us using the proof text method. And I just wanted to understand if people understood what the historical grammatical method was and
So
how.
You gave us the definition, and then I think you asked, do the prophets or writers, do they use that method? I think that you asked that question.
Yeah, the Sunday churches use the method as well. Yeah.
No, but I thought you said you didn't find it in inspiration.
No, I didn't.
So your question, it seems to me, is do do inspired writers,
They do.
either Ellen White or in the Bible, do they use this methodology? I think that's what your question was.
I did. It was.
Okay, and I'm going to put Curtis sort of on the spot, and he said, if I understood him correctly, we use that methodology as much as the Sunday keepers, as much as the Adventists do. He said we use it. So I'm going to suggest, put words in his mouth, that yes, the prophets use the same methodology as well. Everybody's using it. He didn't quite say that, he didn't go on to the prophets bit, but he said we use it.
All right.
He can answer a bit further if he wants to.
Yeah, no, I concur.
All right. Okay then.
So everybody, so if he concurs that everybody's using it, the prophets are using it, we're using it, all the Christians are using it.
Okay. Okay. When I looked at that, I thought it was very similar to the originalism. I don't know who's brought that up. I haven't brought that up. Or shall I? It's very. I thought that when I read that, it was very much like the method that the political people use in originalism. I don't know if you see some similarities in that, in how they're trying to interpret the Constitution.
Again, when we think about originalism and we think about, at its broad definition, it's going into the original intent of said author of whatever document, going into the surrounding atmosphere or not atmosphere, situation, and applying that. And what originalism does is take that definition into a present day context, as opposed to historical grammatical methodology, which from what I understand seeks to just understand that, but there's additional layers of steps that go on beyond that to make whatever application, to bring to make spiritual applications or go across dispensations. It's not a parallel like for like in my mind, because this methodology is not in isolation, as opposed to originalism, which is used in isolation to make a point.
Okay, thank you. In Great Controversy, we see that she doesn't start off with the fall of Satan there. She starts off with the fall of Jerusalem. Then she goes through the reformers and snares of Satan. And can the dead speak to us? So she talks about spiritualism there. And then the liberty of conscience is threatened. And then the impending conflict. So there's two, even though they're written in the same sort of year, they are two separate histories as we go on to find that out. So can you go to the next slide, please?
Debbie, can you just clarify, what do you mean they're written in the same year? Spiritual gifts and great
Well,
confidence.
they're near enough, but because I think that because they were both written in about 1858, we know that the spiritual gifts was written in 1858 or 1857, and because what took place there is that slavery was sort of ended in 1863. So because that ended, perhaps she maybe because she thought Christ was going to come in that time, which he should have done. So I think from that time, because that ended, she then went on to this new other book, The Great Controversy. So I think that's how it took place. Hope that explains it okay.
It's not written in the same year though. There's quite a few years between, because great
I
controversy.
I was trying to find that out. I mean, every time you tried to look at it kept saying 1858, but I know that's when it was published, but I couldn't find anywhere where it was said it was written.
I don't know, but great controversy wasn't 1888 though. It was 1888 and there was a 1911 edition, but it was written for that around the 1888 period in that. And spiritual gifts was written, like say, in 1858 for around the Civil War history.
Oh, right, okay.
There was a big gap between them, and that's why there's that, I suppose, the difference. Progression, a different scenario.
Right, okay.
If I can just add a point, spiritual gifts, often we don't use that book, we use early writings. I think most of us are familiar with that. Early writings is a compilation, we'll say, of a couple of books, and spiritual gifts is in that. Early writings was published quite late. Early writings was published around the same kind of time as the Great Controversy was. But as the title says, it's called early writings. It's a compilation or a new printing of older or earlier materials. So I think spiritual gifts is about 30 years before the Great Controversy.
Oh, right, okay.
And in fact, spiritual gifts is kind of like the predecessor of the Great Controversy. The Great Controversy comes in different versions. And I guess scholars would say that the earliest version of the Great Controversy would have been spiritual gifts, and it just gets refined and refined as time goes on. And just one other point, it's about the target audience for those two books, and they're completely different. Spiritual gifts is the target audience is the church, and the Great Controversy, the target audience is the world.
Right.
So that's why they're so similar, and that's why there is some differences as well.
Okay.
I don't think that undoes anything that you're doing in your study. I think it's your study.
That's made me understand it a little bit more. Thank you for that, Linda. Thank you. I would appreciate that. All right, can we go on to the next slide, please? Or is it jammed?
Oh, sorry, I don't know how to
I'm having some good luck with this study, aren't I, today?
Oh, no.
It's a bad luck.
It's probably going to go 3 ahead now. Is that the next
Yeah,
one?
if you I think that, yeah, can you go on the next one?
Yeah.
I think it's that one, is it? Oh no. It should say, as you will see from the two. So can you go to the previous one? Sorry. No, the previous one.
Right.
Previous one. Yeah.
That's it.
Right. Okay. Do you want to read that for me, Emma, please?
As you will see from the two Ellen White books above, they were published, again, we just went through that about 30 years apart. Spiritual Gifts was published first, and then Great Controversy. It begins with the fall of Satan in 1 SG, then the first advent of Christ, then the history of Christ down to the death of Stephen. I think you've said this. Do you want to keep going?
I think I have.
Shall I just keep reading? Go to the
next. Yeah.
Okay. The conversion of Saul, the great apostasy, the mystery of iniquity, which is the 1260 period of 538 to 1798, and the rise of the papacy. She then talks about William Miller, the sanctuary, spiritualism and covetousness, 1850 waymark, and then sins of Babylon. What were the sins of Babylon, and did Adventists understand what these were, and where was their information gathered from? So Revelation 17, Babylon the Great, who corrupt themselves by idolatrous devotion to the service of the papacy. So what does Ted Wilson say? He says he follows the historical, grammatical, biblical method of interpretation and not the proof text method. And then you've got, so how does Adventists use the historical, grammatical method? Slavery was first introduced in the US by 1619 in Virginia. Even though it was a fairly new nation, they tried to form some sort of government and democracy. So we can see that slavery had entered the USA early on from its development. It's a point and waymark we come to understand in our reform line. When you read this chapter where Ellen White says their cup is full, we will see that judgment is imminent. Thank you.
Next one, please. So with the Great Controversy, the first chapter begins with the destruction of Jerusalem. It then takes us through persecution, spiritual darkness, and through reforms and reformations from 538 to 1798 period. The next chapters take us through William Miller and the sanctuary dates, 1798 to 1844. The next chapters are spiritual and covetousness, 1850 period. The liberty of conscience is threatened, and the next chapter is the impending conflict. The scriptures will be our safeguard. Then you have the final cry, which is the final warning. So if the conscience is being threatened through a previous period of darkness, what was it that they needed to understand and be prepared for? That was the Sunday law. Let me go to the next slide, please. Now, this is some reform lines that we're going to go through. It's not specifically putting dates on them per se, but we're going to be looking at this reform line to see what we understand what E.G. White is reiterating. So in this line, we have 1798, the time of the end. Then we have the 1844, which encompasses the Millerite history. Then we have the Sunday law. Then we have the loud cry, the close of probation, 7 last plagues and 7 and Christ coming. So out of that line, we've got, we should see, we're going to talk about Moses, Christ, Millerites, and the 144,000 during that time. And what we see above is 4 dispensations. So Moses was failure, Christ was a success, Millerites were a failure, then the 144 was a success. In between those little black blobs I put in there is darkness. So what we need to understand, we've got on that particular line, that form line is what we understand from the Great Controversy. We've got the first spiritual gifts, 1858, and of course we've got the Great Controversy in 1888. And I'm going to ask you some questions about those 2 particular things in a moment. What I want to ask is, what does anybody know what we mean by dispensationalism? What do we mean by dispensationalism? So can anybody answer the question?
When we take that meaning of dispensationalism and how we use it, it would be like you've described there, in designating different periods in history, and seeing how God has worked in that specific period of history until God has done a work, or it's failed, or, well, not God failed, but the people failed, and then a period of darkness comes, and then another dispensation comes. So dispensationalism would be looking at each of those dispensations and seeing how the truth has progressed through those dispensations.
All right,
that would be different to how other groups see dispensationalism. But
so, yeah,
this study, I think that definition applies.
Of course, we can say they are separate histories. You could say that as well, couldn't we, Curtis?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay then. So
I add to that, is it to do with the traditions and the cultures of that country at that time? That's a question.
What was the question again, Cedric?
Is dispensation to do with the traditions and the history and the culture at that time?
Well, all I know is that dispensation, it talks about when you come to an end of a year, say 1798, you come to the time of the end, you come to an end of a dispensation, then you start a new one. So I don't know if that's the question that you're asking. So
no, because when you look at the different dispensations, just like to say for Moses, where maybe you're not allowed more than one wife or something, you have to look at the culture and the tradition at that time and just check out and see what was happening at that time too. Is that what it fully embraces to?
Does anybody want to answer Cedric's question? I don't think it's what she's meaning, but does anybody else want to answer that question?
I'm just looking at the definition of dispensation. It says a political, religious, or social system prevailing at a particular time. So in that sense, it's taking all the context of that time period and looking at it within that context, but recognizing that we don't apply it exactly the same way because we're in a different time period.
Exactly. So you can't, in other words, you can't bring it forward because when it's ended, it's ended.
No. I'm not talking about bringing forward. I'm just trying to understand, the history at that time. Did it include the traditions and the customs of what was going on then, the dispensation?
Yes. Yeah, Cedric. Yeah. Everything that went into how society operated would be what a dispensation entails.
Thank you, Curtis.
Right, okay.
Question answered.
Yeah. Right, okay, so so even though there were scatterings and gatherings, nevertheless, these histories are still brought together. So how do we know there were scatterings and gatherings? So I know that Elder Paminda read from early writings, page 74. And in this chapter, she states that God reached his hand out twice concerning the scatterings. So we know there were some scatterings just before 1844, because we know that after 1844, obviously at 1844, the movement dissolved. And so after that would have been a gathering. So we see a second, there must be if there was a second, there must be a first. So there was the first scatterings must have been well before 1798. So where we put the second gathering just before 1844, because that was a history of failure and the movement dissolved. So after that, that would have been a gathering. That would have been after 1863, because that's when Christ was supposed to come. So at the we're going to look at 1888. At the 1888 Sunday Law Waymark, great controversy. This is the history of the Sunday Law, even though there wasn't a Sunday Law. But plans were being issued to bring about a Blair Bill by Senator Blair. That's why it's called Blair Bill, because it was by a senator called Blair. It was called the Blair Bill because it was going to be pushed through Congress. So in E.G.'s writings about this, she does reiterate that this was in the making well before this time. She says that while there had been a great deal of Sunday legislation by the various states, the record of attempts of national legislation is very brief. So in 1820, as early as 1828 to 29, petitions were laid before Congress asking for the discontinuance of Sunday mails. And it was brought before a committee where it was referred. So she was saying that the Sunday Law was in its early beginnings well before 1888. We know that in 1888, we know that A.T. Jones was very instrumental in bringing arguments to that Congress, where he actually spoke to Senator Blair, and he actually brought Matthew 22:21 to that argument, where Jesus says, render thereunto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, unto God which are God's. So these are, I mean, he obviously brought more arguments to it, but these were some of the arguments. And you can actually read about that in the actual argument between him and Senator Blair. So he brings up some very good arguments which make them think. So arguments which were based on the US Constitution as well. So in the end, what happened to that? The Sunday Law Bill did not go ahead due to Congress looking at the Constitution and raising some questions upon it. And so because of that, it wasn't approved. So you can actually read more in detail about that in the Blair Sunday Rest Bill by E.G. White. It's very, very informative there. So when we're looking at this line, you notice we stated in 1888, the Sunday Law did not come into force. It ended. So if this is the case, how would this reform line look now? So looking at that reform line, would we say that that is correct? We've just spoken about dispensationalism. So looking at that reform line that I've got on the screen, would you say that is correct? I'm going to put that out to the brethren.
Sorry, I don't really understand which line you talk about. You're saying if
the line that's
Sunday.
Yeah, the line that is in front of you. What we just spoke about dispensationalism just a moment ago. So looking at that particular line, would you say that everything that's on there on that line is correct? Does that answer the question? Did I ask the question right, Elder Paminda?
Yes.
Yeah. So did you understand that, Curtis? Does anybody else, can anybody else answer the questions as well?
Correct in what way? The line correct in what way? Because there's lots missing from that. So what do you want to get out of that line?
Well, I was going to say what I'm talking in particular about about 1858 and 1888.
What are you saying about 1858?
Well, is it right to put it in that line? That's the question that I'm asking. Is it correct that I've put those there? Because
As periods of darkness.
yeah, because we've just been speaking about dispensationalism.
Yeah, you can put them there. It depends on the point that you're making. So if you're wanting to draw out that those were dispensations where the church was in darkness, and you're highlighting that point, I would say that putting them there is appropriate.
Right, okay. Anybody else? Emma?
Weren't those books to bring light? I don't understand the darkness.
Did you get that question, Debbie?
No, sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, Natalie, you want to repeat?
I was just saying, maybe I'm misunderstanding this.
Yeah, I'm just what I'm talking. Yeah,
About bringing light, not darkness.
no.
No, they are bringing light, so I don't understand why they're darkness. I must be misunderstanding.
Is it because, Debbie, is it because at the bottom you put that, you know, the Millerites obviously was a line of failure, so
Yes.
those are in the like history, so there's
Yeah.
failure there.
That's what I'm trying to bring out. I probably didn't ask the question right, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to bring out. Yes, thank you, Emma.
I think when you were asking about the line, are you saying that it's not correct because none of that happened in that history, Sunday law?
Right, this is what I'm trying to bring out. Yeah, I'm
So
trying
because
to bring out. Yeah, go on, Emma. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. No, yeah.
No, go on. Yeah, I was going to say, because we know in first spiritual gifts, we know that the first history ended in 1863. So basically what I'm talking about dispensational wise is that if it ended in 1863, then surely we should be starting a new line from 1888, because we know that 1863 the line ended. So we know that from 1798 up to 1863, that would have been during the Millerite period. You see where I'm coming from now, Emma?
I think so. Yeah.
Does anybody understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I get your
Right,
point.
okay,
That
right.
if there was a Sunday law in 1888, you would have
Exactly.
needed to have a time of the end, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah, that's what I'm
prior
trying
to.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know what the answer to that question is, but just Natalie said that there was light that was brought in 1888. And if I were to think of prior to 1798 and the reformers, the Reformation, there was light amidst that darkness that came. So I don't think like having light necessitates having a new line. I know there's differences when we talk about 1888, but just that came to mind, that you can still have shards of light coming in a period of darkness. But we know in 1888 it's kind of different because it's talking about a Sunday law. So you would expect a time of the end, and all the other 5 waymarks of a reform line.
Right, okay. Yeah, thank you. So I've got here, remember she wrote First Spiritual Gifts in 1858. The 2 books are different. So the 2 books are different, but they repeat and enlarge each other. So we know in the First Spiritual Gifts, that history ended in 1863 when Christ should have come. So that history covered slavery. Okay, so in the Great Controversy, that history covered the 1888 history of the Sunday law, which didn't come to pass either. So there's 2 histories of failure here, where both things that were supposed to come didn't come to pass. So both histories, even though both histories are different, and those histories ended in those dates, and they were both failures. Because we understand about dispensations and the time of the end, especially 1989 in our history, Adventists would not have understood that reform line because of our 1989. They don't understand the time of the end, so they wouldn't have understood 1989, time of our history. And because they did not understand dispensationalism, they wouldn't have used the proof text methodology either. So, so do Adventists understand the literal and spiritual interpretations? That's a question. Do Adventists understand literal and spiritual interpretations?
Yeah.
They do. Right, okay. So if right.
Well, that's my guess.
Well, but because what I'm saying is, if you're looking at the literal and spiritual, we know that the literal would have been in the Older Testament, and when Christ came, then that would have been spiritual. So that's what I'm talking about there. So
can I ask you a question when you
Sure.
finish this point?
Yeah, go on. Sorry, Elder Beminda. Sorry, I didn't hear it.
I wasn't clear what point you were making, but it seems significant what you said a few minutes ago, that the church, Adventism, doesn't understand 1989. I think we would agree on that.
Yeah.
And you said because they don't recognize it, they don't see it, it
Yeah.
causes a problem. You didn't
Yes.
say it that way, but it causes
Well,
a
it
problem.
does.
And that problem is something to do with dispensationalism.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could just clarify the point that you're making, because you've got 1798, time of the end, and you've got a line. I can see that, and I think you've got several dates there and several events. So the earlier ones are all dates, and the later ones are events. Sunday law. All Adventists would agree with that. I don't think that's anything revolutionary. That's not unique to our thinking. All
No.
Adventists agree with that because it's just factual waymarks.
Yes.
So it's to do with the application, which
Yeah.
I think you're not interchanging them. You are using them correctly, but there's application and then there's also dispensation.
Which I'm going to bring in the next slide.
Sure. So my question was, when you spoke about 1989, you said it in reference to applications and you made it in reference to dispensation. So I wasn't clear about the point that you were trying to draw out and teach us. And maybe that's what you're about to say, which is why I didn't fully understand or grasp it.
Yeah. What was I saying? What I'm going to go to or speak about basically is talk about why I'm going to get to the point why Adventists still are holding on to the Sunday law. That's the point I'm trying to bring out.
Sure. Okay.
So and that's why I'm speaking about it. But I'm going to speak more about that in the next slide, which I actually make some lines and make it probably more understanding there, if that's okay with you, Elder Beminda.
If you ever wanted to say something, yeah, it's fine with me.
No, I was
Yes.
just going to say, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yes, okay, yeah. So yeah. So yeah, okay then. So here it is. So I was talking about the literal and the spiritual, which Elder Beminda brought out in his previous study, and I thought that was very for me, made me understand a little bit more. But this particular line, which is what Elder Beminda drew, and he was talking, this is how he divided up the two dispensations, okay? And this is what I was speaking about in the previous slide. So in this particular slide, you'll notice two histories, right? And which include our own, the 144,000, okay? So the Reform line includes histories from the Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1, and the Great Controversy, which is the 1911 version that we're reading from. So everything has been discussed from both those books have been included in this line. But is this correct? Can all the histories be put into one line? And that was the question from the previous one. So what we've done, we've actually split it up into two. And we've put Spiritual Gifts Volume 1. We know that the history about slavery, like I've reiterated, was ended in 1863, which included the Civil War timeframe, a result of judgment, and that ended, the slavery ended. So we see in the Great Controversy, which is B, that history with a pending Sunday law called the Blair Bill did not come to fruition, and the bill eventually was revoked. So this history also ended. So if both history ended, are we licensed to bring forward these into new dispensations? And the answer to that is what? No. The red line that I've got above 1888 is that I'm going to talk to you more about what Adventists are seeing. So where the title of this is Why Adventists Will Not See the Sunday Law. So the dotted line that I've got above 1888 forward, basically this is how Adventists are seeing it. They've looked at 1888 and they didn't recognize, because they're not following the proof text methodology, and they don't understand fully reform lines, and especially dispensationalism. Because of this, they have brought the 1888 history into our history, and of the opinion, because and that's why they still think there's going to be a Sunday law in the future. So does everybody understand why we've split these two histories up the way that we have?
Let's just ask the question.
Yes, sorry, go on.
You asked the question a minute ago, and the answer was no. I can't remember exactly what the question was. Emma said no as well. So
yeah. So the question was, if both histories ended. So in other words, if the 1863 history ended, and then also the Sunday law ended in 1888, are we licensed to bring these two and put them together on one line?
Okay, so I think I didn't understand. Why can't we have a Sunday law? Because the 1888 history came to an end.
Because it ended. It didn't come to pass, did it, in that period?
So why can't it be fulfilled a little bit later on?
Because of the time of the end, we're entering a new dispensation, and what you're not allowed to do is to bring something that's ended into a new dispensation. So what we're saying is that the Adventists, what they're doing, they're not recognizing the time of the end, and they're not recognizing dispensationalism. So what they've done from 1888 is done away with those and brought it back into our time. So that's why they're of the opinion that there's still a Sunday law going to take place.
So are you saying that they're taking 1888 and bringing it into the future? Is that what you're saying?
Into our time, yeah.
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 And I'm saying they should have just kept it back in its old time.
Yes, they're still, because they're not understanding that 1888 has been ended. So what they've done is they've taken that information and they've brought it forward, still thinking that there's going to be a Sunday law, because they're not recognizing dispensation. They don't understand 1989. They don't believe that it's ended. And so if it's something's ended, they can't bring it into the future. So that's what they're still doing.
Okay, I got that.
I'm hoping that's what I've said it correctly.
The 1858 Spiritual Gifts Volume 1.
Yeah, ends in 1863. So that's one.
So my question wasn't where it ends. Where does it begin? Is it 1798?
Yes.
Okay, so the 1888, the Great Controversy, where does that begin and end?
Oh, sorry, it's 1798.
They both begin in 1798.
Yeah.
And they both end. Well, one ends in 63. Where does the other one end?
About 1890s, something like that.
Okay, so in the 1888 history ends there.
Yeah.
And you're saying they're all part of one line?
No, I'm saying that they're two separate histories. That's why I've got A and B, that I'm saying that two separate histories, because there's a cut-off period where in 1863 where it ended, and also another cut-off period from 1989.
The 1888 history
from 1890s.
That begins in 1798.
Yeah.
And it ends in the 1890s.
Yeah.
And the Spiritual Gifts begins at the same time.
Yeah.
And ends in 63.
Yeah.
And then there's a new history which begins in 1989.
Yes. Yes, because that's a new dispensation. What the Adventists have done, they've brought it forward. They haven't recognized that there's a new dispensation, and so what they've done is they've brought or that Sunday law history into our time. That's why they're still of the opinion that there's still going to be a Sunday law in our time.
So in this graphic, there's one line, but does that one line contain 3 lines, or I don't know if you want to call them dispensations?
Two. Yeah.
Name the first one, 1798 to 63.
Yeah.
That's number 1. And number 2 is?
1888.
Where does it begin and where does it end?
Well, in our dispensation.
I thought you said the 1888 one begins in 1798 and ends in 1890.
Yeah, I'm not talking about when I'm talking about how Adventists are seeing it. They're seeing it, even though we know where our dispensation.
So yeah, I'm asking how you see it, not how they see it currently.
Right.
So I'm saying, are you saying that there are 3 stories here?
No, I'm saying there's 2.
So one of them seems to me 1798 to 63. Got that one.
Yeah.
The other one seems to be 1989 to you've got Sunday law, which is fine. You've got shut door. That's 2. And where does the 1888 one fit in? Because it's not in either of them.
No, but that's because I'm saying that's where they're taking it from. They're looking.
I'm asking I'm asking what you see, not what they're seeing.
I'm looking at it and I'm saying that what they're doing, because the Sunday law was 1888, and I'm saying that they're not looking or understanding about dispensationalism. So they're taking it Sunday law. They're looking back. They're looking back at 1888.
You're seeing, not what they're seeing.
No, no, this is because this is how we saw it. If we look at the FFA, this is how we were seeing it. We weren't understanding dispensationalism ourselves.
I'm just wondering how you see it today, not in the past, not what the church sees. Because if you've got 2 lines here, your first line is 1798 to 63.
Yeah.
And then your second line is 89 to the Sunday law.
Yes, but I'm looking at what I'm talking about is where I've put that red dotted line.
Yeah,
that's what I want to focus on.
I think the question is, we know what you're trying to focus on here, but how do you see it today? How do we see it in the movement that's different from this? So how would you explain those lines as we see it, as you see it now personally? Not what you're trying to show us about how the church sees it, but how do we conceptualize that? Write those lines.
I don't know what you want me to say. I mean, I thought I've answered that question already. I don't know what else to say.
Because you're not seeing it like that with the red line on top, are you? Because you're saying you can't bring 1888 into our history.
No, but that's what.
So that's what the Adventists are seeing. That's fine.
Yeah.
How do we see it? If you start, where does that 1888? So are we seeing 3 lines there with 1888 as a second line? How are you seeing it in dispensationally? I'm seeing that, well, probably with 3 histories, probably. I would say 3 histories, because 1888 up to 1893. I think A.T. Jones was going to, I think he saw another Sunday law at 1893, is what I read. So that would probably be 3 dispensations, probably. So if there's 3, where does the second one start? I think that's probably where I've got a question, I suppose. I don't know if that's if the first one to 1863, where's the 1888 one? What's the line? What's the second line start and finish? Well, I have got that on here, believe it or not. I've got on the next couple of slides, I've actually explained that. I explained the 3 histories. Okay. So I explain it on the other slide. Do you want to go there then? Yes, okay then. Does this answer the question? Yeah. So we see from the diagrams above that there are 3 histories, which are what we're familiar with. So the Millerites, then we see the SDAs, then we see the 144,000. So the Millerites, we see that Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1, is part of the Millerite history from 1798. And from our studies, we understood by looking back that Christ did not come back in that history. And so we did not understand, well, it didn't come back in 1863, which was the end of slavery.
So that's the second Advent. So they went into darkness. So we look at the SDAs now, which is the second one. And in 88, at the history we know from the Great Controversy, there was a pending Sunday law known as the Blair Bill. So even though the bill had been prepared and issued at Congress, it was not approved, therefore cancelled, and the Sunday law did not take place. So in both these histories, Hiram Edson and A.T. Jones were studied and understood the histories back in their time, and both used their findings in booklets and pamphlets to explain their understanding of it. So A.T. Jones was very instrumental in bringing about arguments about the Sunday law to the Congress, as he spoke to Senator Blair. So arguments between Senator Blair and A.T. Jones can be found on Google. So if you were to read those in more detail, and once again, Christ was supposed to come in the 1890s, but he didn't return. So there's two histories here now where Christ would have returned. So we now move into our dispensation, which is the 144 dispensation, our movement of the 144,000. And that was the 1911 version of the Great Controversy, which was then revised. So, and of course, we get our information externally from journalists known as prophets. Does this explain, Emma, about the three histories that you were talking about in the previous slide? Is this what you wanted to see? So we can see here that Christ didn't come in the first one, didn't come in the second, so he'll come in the third. Does this explain it a bit more? Or what you wanted to see?
I think that kind of answers the question of how you're seeing it. I think I've got questions about it, but I don't want to derail the sorry. It's because I think the logic
Don't do what you're doing.
don't derail. Yeah. Carry on.
Can I ask you a question, Debbie, when you got in the break, when you got a break, I want to ask you a couple of questions.
When I've got a break?
When you finish the point you want to make.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm finished now before I go on to the next slide. I don't know if there's anything else you want me to put to this. Maybe this is what you're trying to bring out from the previous slide, I think, Elder Paminda.
That's exactly what I was trying to ask.
Yes. Yeah.
That's right.
Exactly.
So that's clear.
Yeah.
So in the first line, do you, in your understanding, where's the Sunday law?
In the first line,
Yeah.
1863. So it'll be at the second.
No.
It should be at the second. Well, I've put it at the end there, haven't I? There.
Well, second, you got second Advent 1862. Where'd you put the Sunday law in that line? Or you don't know?
It'll be eight. Oh, I see what you mean.
If you don't know, it's fine. It's not a quiz. I'm just asking.
Well, I would have said Sunday law, second Advent. Well, it can't be the second Advent, can it really?
Don't guess if you don't know.
Yeah, no. I think what I was trying to bring out there was that
I understand
Christ would have come in that time.
Yeah. I get that. You got 1858.
Yeah.
That's when the book's written.
Yeah.
Do you think the Sunday law is before the book's written or after the book's written?
After.
You think the Sunday law is after?
Yeah.
In the second line, 1893 is the second Advent. You've got that. And then you've got the book, which is 1888.
Mm-hmm.
Would the Sunday law be before or after the book?
Would have been after.
So in both of those two lines, you've got the Sunday law happening after the books.
Yeah.
If I understand you correctly, yes?
Yes.
And then in our line, if we say our message is the book, if I were to conjecture that our message, however we want to understand that, would our message be before or after the Sunday law?
Our message.
Our book, yeah, our documents, our whatever we have, our statement.
Our statement would be before the Sunday law, wouldn't it?
Okay, so in all of those three lines, according to your understanding, 1858, 1888, and whatever date we're going to put for our book or our information, they're all pre-Sunday law. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah. I don't know if it makes a difference to you or what you're saying, but on that first line, my understanding is that and it wasn't my study. I don't think it was. And yeah, I won't take ownership of that one. I think that Sunday law is before the book's written. On the first line, it's actually 1850, if I remember correctly. Someone might correct me if I'm wrong. So I think in line 1, the Sunday law, this book is written after the Sunday law, not before.
Right. Yeah.
And in the second one, I agree with you that there was no Sunday law. So the book was definitely written before the Sunday law.
Mm.
And in our history, we know everything. All of our videos, our documents are already out, and we haven't had a Sunday law yet. So I agree on that one. But the first one's an anomaly, that the book is written after the Sunday law. And if that's the case, do they know what is actually happening? What, if I can call it, what the test is? Because in the second line, Jones tells you what the test is. I don't care if they're right or wrong. He says, this is the test and it's coming. We're saying, whatever our test is, the test is coming and we're going to tell you before the event. But on the first line, I think that book is written after the test has even happened, which means that they didn't even know there was a test.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that has a great significance about what we want to draw out from these lines. So I don't know if anybody wants to just confirm or if you want to confirm or you want to deny my date for the first line. I've got Sunday law as 50. I don't know if anybody agrees with that.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I just want to make a point about
okay,
that.
so there's fair few of us who recalled that study being done, which means the books afterwards. And I think that should change the way we view that line. I don't know if it has any implications to that change. And I'm not saying it affects the study that you're doing today. But I did want to point that out, which is why I was trying to get those 3 lines in the previous slide, because I'd noticed there's that difference. So you can carry on, or someone else said they wanted to say something. I don't know. I'm done.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to add to Elder Pamida's comments?
I did, but you can carry on with your study.
You go, Curtis.
Oh, to you, Natalie.
No, go on.
My point or question was not pertaining to the specific points the study was trying to address. So I think I can park it.
Okay. Natalie?
Yeah, I agree. And I was just for my own lack of knowledge. So before 1850, they were totally on shipwreck. Yeah. And I guess after the book, was it more so for the loud cry, the second advent? But it was a total failure anyway. Yeah. I'm wrong in saying that. No.
When you mark shipwreck, or when I'm thinking of when that history goes into darkness, we usually point to them not recognizing the 2520 in 1863 as to why they go into darkness, which we can hold as true. They reject the chart in 1863 or and etc., go into darkness. But that point about them looking back in 1858, or Ellen White only writing about a Sunday law in 1858, where they were oblivious to before, I think points to what Natalie's bringing out, is that from 1798 up to through those years, they just kept digging the hole, if you want to call it that. And that shipwreck, in inverted commas, I don't want to say became inevitable, but that path was being ridden on and just kept getting worse and worse, because as the point was made, they didn't see the Sunday law beforehand, which is what the prophecy is meant to do, if you want to call it that, see the events as they are happening. And so when we take that shipwreck to 1863 and mark that as the point, I don't think, sure, that's where it culminates, but in essence, it's a period that starts way before that, of them ending up in a history of failure. It was bound to happen because they just don't see what's happening around them. from years before.
Okay. Can we go on to the next slide, please? I'm just thinking about time now. If nobody has any other comments they want to add. Right, we're just going to go, this is the last slide. This is our reform line, and we know from, as we look from Eden to Eden, what the messages that the three angels messages that we're going to have for our time, which Adventists don't understand. And of course, when you look at the very first one to the second one, we can see, is it a chiasm or chiatic structure, where the first one mirrors the end. So we know that our end time message will be to do with gender, where Adventists will still think it's the Sunday law, and they're very adamant that it's the Sunday law. They don't want to move it out of there because they don't have our proof text methodology, and they're adamant. They're so adamant it's the Sunday law that they feel safe by holding on to the Great Controversy book and saying that it is the Sunday law, and they don't want to come out of that idea. So does anybody else have any questions before we end our presentation today? Or do they want to add any other questions to it? There was something that I remember I did a while ago on Raymond Cottrell. I don't know if anybody knows who he is. But he was an Adventist scholar who came into the church after, because the church from the 1930s was still studying the proof text method, and he came in with this historical method, he called it, and there was an altercation between him and these other people who were studying the proof text methods, where they didn't want his method in. It came to the stage where, because it was popular with the conference, that they adopted his claims, and how he came into this information was he read a German book by a German author, and it spoke quite deeply about the historical critical methods and grammatical methods, and this is how he brought it into the Adventist church. This has been brought in for about 70 odd years now. He didn't die until he was about 90. But when you look into it's a good thing if people want to sort of, if they don't understand who he is. And he says, the first of the two methods of reading and understanding the Bible usually goes by the name proof text method, which often takes Bible statements and passages out of their original historical and iterary method. So this was his opinion. And and of course, we know he didn't, when you read more into Raymond Cottrell, he couldn't figure out the Daniel 8:14. So you'll need to sort of go into that. He couldn't understand how the interpretation came about, how through the proof text methods. But what I can't understand is, even though he said what he says, when we look at when we read Isaiah 28, and it talks about line upon line, here a little, there a little, that is where it's explaining the proof text method. So when he says that Christ, or not Christ, but the Holy Spirit told him about this new method, I'm quite surprised that the conference didn't challenge him about that, because how can Christ tell us one method and then the Holy Spirit tell him another? So with that, I'll leave you that within thought. I'll end the study. And does anybody else? Yes, sorry.
Go on.
I know you wanted to just leave that thought out in the open, but just commenting on it nonetheless, if you'll allow me.
Yes.
I think historically in the movement, and your typical conservative Adventists or whoever have been critical of the historical grammatical method. And historically, at times, we've employed a strict proof texting methodology. And I think that we can appreciate how that's got us into trouble in the past by looking at these things in isolation, these methodologies, if you want to call it, in isolation. You have to be historical grammatical or be proof texting. And I think we've come to the place where, if I want to put it under the banner of parable teaching, it's a holistic methodology that employs proof texting, but being guided by, or that has foundations in historical grammatical And so that place where we were at one point of being, I'll say, overly critical of historical, grammatical, got us into problems in our understanding of doctrine. And so, yeah, I don't know too much about the person that you mentioned and
Right, okay.
what their
It's worth-
positions were and
It's
etc.
worth reading about him, really.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you,
But
Curtis.
on the topic of methodology, our methodology today reflects a lot of that, as well as proof texting. It's kind of like a mixture of both, as well as other tools, if you want to call it that. So just being wary of where we criticize.
Yeah, all right. Okay then. And Emma?
I thought that was a really good answer. Thank you, Curtis.
Emma?
Yeah, I don't know, looking at this line again, it's just the way you drew the lines on the previous one and the point you were making at the beginning. So this is a question, I don't have an answer. I don't want to open up. I suppose it might extend the study. But your original premise, or one of them, was that they can't take something in one dispensation and put it in another.
Yeah.
When the way we drew the lines on the last slide was that 1888, it seems to be in the same dispensation as 1863, because we don't have a time of the end for 1888. Now, I'm not saying we should do. And that point, it links to the point Elder Verminder was making about the Sunday law and where it is on that line and how strange that whole thing is. So you've got race, which we would mark up to 1863, I suppose, and then we would say the next dispensation is worship. But you started that dispensation in 1798, so it's the same era, it's the same dispensation, and they don't get knowledge of that Sunday law before it; they get it after.
Yeah.
I suppose. I wanted to go back to spiritual gifts now and say, does she use the term? Obviously, she doesn't use the term Sunday law because she's talking about slavery. So what we call Sunday law, but then in this 1888 history, they get this knowledge of this. So it was almost like race and worship are in the same dispensation. If you look at it like that, the way that you drew the lines on the previous slide. And there's only one Sunday law being agitated in a sense that she speaks about in 1888 book, Great Controversy. So I think Natalie asked this question under her breath, which was, why did she write 1858 after the event?
I know why she wrote it.
Okay.
I mean, the time before 1850, they actually failed. She failed. No one spotted they were coming up to the Sunday law in their history. Yeah. So she failed as a prophet in that time, I would say. I'm sorry if that upset someone. And then the question was, why did she write that book then afterwards? And I would say that was for the loud cry, which she definitely failed before.
So, but it was for the loud cry when? So we're going to say
that she's been it's before 1863, isn't she?
That was the loud cry before 1863.
That's what I've heard our midnight cry messenger say.
To you, Natalie, or anyone, when she speaks about God gathering their hand for a second time, what year was that?
That was the second time, would have been after 1844, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's a specific year we place on that.
Because the second one, because that's when they failed. The whole movement collapsed then, didn't it? So the gathering would have been after that.
Yeah, but what year specifically?
I think it's 1848 she wrote it, so it was a second gathering after that. They'd been scattered by the
1850. 1850.
1850.
Mm.
Yeah, 1850.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've been
If it is 1850, then wait, sorry, please carry on, Emma. I cut you off.
No, I'm just trying to clarify. They've been scattered because of the disappointment, and now they're being regathered in this with the second chart. Would we say then?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's when it came.
So, if they're in darkness from 1844 up until God is gathering them in 1850, they're in darkness, and so they don't have a mission, if you want to call it that. They don't have vision of these prophetic events. Sure, they're navigating and figuring out what's gone wrong, but they don't see an approaching Sunday law because they are in darkness. And yeah, sure, we can say Ellen White failed and etc., but she's as much affected by this period of darkness as are all the other Millerites around her.
So so when she writes, I know Natalie's answer was when she writes that book, she's preparing them for the loud cry, which we're saying if we follow things on a line, should have been near 1850 or near the Sunday law, if that was the Sunday law in that history. Was it for the future loud cry, which we know now is related to Sunday in 1888?
It could still have been the history of loud cry, because the close of probation would have been in 1860. So maybe the loud cry would have been in that year, or 59.
Okay, so 59, 60, leading up to 61, close probation when Civil War starts.
Yeah.
So I put that line. Okay.
Okay. If there's no questions, we'll end the study. And thank you very much for your participation in today's study. I certainly have learned a lot from it. There's things that I didn't perhaps understand properly, correctly, but it's nice to sort of go over it and look back. And so thank you very much. So we're going to have a word of prayer now just to end our study, our Sabbath school. So dear Holy God, we thank you so much for the study today. I hope that people were blessed by it, and as we go over past presentations, and that we really understood or understood more the things perhaps that we didn't understand before. But thank you for everybody that was here who participated, because it helped not only me, I'm sure it helped others as well. So please continue to bless the rest of our day now, Lord, and the rest of our service. And thank you once again, Lord, for a beautiful sunshine that we've got and being with us. For we give you thanks and praise in and through our beloved Saviour, always to your great honor and glory. Amen.
Amen. And thank you, Debbie, for that very challenging, thought-provoking presentation, and also your willingness to endure, and also our, people that were listening in.
We stop the recording, please.